Welcome to week 6. Hope you're doing well. Hope you had a great week 5, had a great weekend, and that you're geared up, ready for week 6, because here we come. For those of y'all that have had me before, typically we don't do a traditional exam. We do like a paper, final project, something of that nature. We're actually going to do a traditional exam. And I'll make sure that you have a study guide so that you're well prepared, and not only a study guide, but that I'll talk a little bit about the opportunity of getting to use your book. How will that look? What will that look like? It won't be the entire time. It won't be a complete open book final, but there will be opportunities of you using your book and you're on the final. So I'll communicate that. So sorry if I got hit in the eye serving in children's ministry today, playing football, and so if you're like, what's going on with his eye? Anywho, talking about last week we talked about adolescents this way. This week we're talking about adults. Next week we'll talk about trying to think off the top of my head what we'll talk about. We need to look at that before next week. But really, adolescence. How many of y'all were kind of surprised by the lecture when we sit there and say, okay, the limbic system and how much that really impacts us? To the extent of really from a social standpoint and or sexual standpoint, and how these two can relate and correlate and impact one another when a person is in a state of pain. When we think about pain, we typically think about, physical pain, but that's not what kind of pain I'm talking about. Now, again, physical pain can create emotional pain, but what I'm really looking for is the dynamic of emotional pain. And as a result of that, how the limbic system and the amygdala and the hippocampus, how those two send signals from the amygdala to the hippocampus. And as a result of that, fight, flight, or freeze gets flooded throughout the body. Cortisol gets flooded through the body. And as a result of that, now to the extent of how much of the body is in need of comfort because it feels pain. Could this be the reason why you may interact with a 17-year-old and as a result of that, they constantly are infatuated with pornography or infatuated with sexual encounters or whatever that may be? And you're sitting there thinking, I don't understand how to help them, or the social dynamics is really impacting them. And as a result of that, where are they in a state of pain? I like to ask this within a lot of individuals. I like to lay a foundation when people come into my office for the first time. I always like to build that rapport. Those things that we typically tell students as you learn within the field of, okay, building that rapport, connecting with them. But I always like to create the opportunity of laying this foundation to talk about the message of pain versus the message of heaven, depending upon are they a believer. And if the message of pain is representational, then as a result of that, I want to help them learn what that message has been to them, and as a result of that, what is being held out in their subconscious mind that's being repressed into the body, and as a result of that, how these two have formulated and has kept them stuck, kept them in pain, and kept them extremely anxious. And as a result of that, which is affirmed a belief system that more than likely not good enough, not whatever it may be. So, adults, how much of the limbic system and this can really be formulated within this population that can impact them significantly? Same is true. Okay, so in this, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the relational aspect of marriages, because a lot of y'all may go into marriage counseling, whether you're kind of on a pastoral track, whether you're in a clinical track, whatever that may be, you're going to find individuals that are contemplating marriage, are in marriage, and they're contemplating, do I get out of this marriage because this is causing pain? And you got to remember, when pain takes place, the pain demands a response. And that response, in a lot of ways, carries a message to the point that tells the individual one thing: I want the pain to stop. So we look for ways to isolate. We look for ways to eradicate. We look for ways to isolate. We will look for ways to deflect. We look for ways to create the defense mechanism so that we don't have to turn inward to actually acknowledge and own. So how do we help adults from the standpoint, well, Brady, my husband, okay? Yeah, remember, validate. Yeah, sounds to me like you're in a lot of pain. Brady, my wife, absolutely. Man, it sounds to me like you're in a lot of pain. Validate. Because if we can acknowledge this, then it gives a greater opportunity for them to get here. Again, spatial analytic logic. The dynamic of what we're instructing, how we're creating guidance, whatever that may look like as you express who you are as a counselor. And this is going to be really, really difficult if they are constantly caught here. So not only do we want to validate, we want to teach them and train them how to validate themselves in those moments when they are experiencing emotional pain. Okay, so one of the dynamics about marriage that we need to see, according to the relationship, the book talking about relationships, one of the dynamics I thought was interesting was says in the United States, 15% of people marry someone from a different race or ethnicity. It goes on to says, while some might think that cultural differences increase tensions in marriage, research does not support this position. What's interesting is that's not what I've experienced. I've actually seen the dynamic of marrying of different race and or ethnicity has actually caused that. Now, Brady, does that mean that shouldn't happen? Well, again, that's not my place to tell people what ethnicities they can marry or they can't. My job is really from the standpoint of how do I help them assimilate and grow in unity together, right? So the dynamic of looking at that and saying, well, Brady, is it easier? Well, I didn't say that either, because here's the dynamic: when two individuals that have upbringing, have different understandings, different ways that was dad present? Was dad not? Was mom present? Was mom not? And then all of a sudden this individual, and you have two individuals who are uniquely different and are brought up in different homes, and all of a sudden they come together to do life together. It's not if they step on toes, it's when. And when that stepping of the toes happens and the pain that's created, what happens then? What happens then? Again, the dynamic of understanding pain and the message that it causes, because again, if that is not acknowledged and owned and processed through, for us being believers with Jesus, that as a result of that, it's going to be repressed, and it's going to give them a interpretation of that individual that's connected with that pain. And again, I saw a teenage boy and his dad this weekend. And as a result of that, this is the very dynamic we talked about, the dynamic of how they see each other. And so you can see that this tool, if I can call it that, actually plays its way out in a teenager and or adolescents and an adult and how they interact. Now, of course, the dynamics within marriage is going to be a little bit different or a lot different. And as a result of that, but the dynamic of how do you see him? How do you see him? Okay. Now, how do you see him? But God sees him differently. And this is an exercise I constantly do. Why? Because if we can understand how God sees the other individual, does that change the perspective of how we see them? Or should it change how we see them? In the research, the book says, going into marriage and middle adulthood, it says that adults say that family relationships become the most important factor in happiness, according to research in 2004. So you think about that, marriage and family relationships become the most important factor in happiness. Okay, well, if we take that and we dissect that, then could the opposite be true as well? That this dynamic could also impact the happiness that a person has in this state of their life. And this is the reason why you're going to have people coming in wanting to talk to you about marriage. This is why people are going to come in and want to talk to you about their families. And the dynamic, as they're constantly telling you what's going on, as they're constantly telling you what's going on, how do we help them? Because all the family members may not be present. I remember hearing a story by Dr. Henry Cloud, and as a result, and through this story that he kept talking about, this dad came to him in the psychiatric hospital, and the dad kept talking to him about the son that he had. And so the one son that came with him, he was like, "Oh, you," and the dad was like, "Oh, no, that's not the son." "Well, where is the son that you're talking about?" "Oh, he's in Colorado." Dr. Cloud was like, he's in Colorado? It's like, "Yeah, what's he doing there?" "Oh, he has a condo on the side of a mountain and is going to school up there." Dr. Cloud was like, "Wow." Thinking in his head, "Wow, this kid's got it going on." And so the dad kept telling him about all the issues that the son kept having. Dropping out of college, or getting kicked out of college, the dad helping him find a new place, new college, and all this. After the dad finished, really, Dr. Cloud really looked at it and said, I don't think I can help you. The dad, perplexed, was like, what do you mean? He goes, well, I can't help you based upon that son. He's not here, but who I can help is I can help you. And as a result of that, the person sitting across from you is who it is that we have the opportunity to help. Now, the person that is sitting across from you may constantly want to talk about family, may constantly want to talk about their marriage, may constantly want to talk about somebody else. And there's that deflection. There's the opportunity that the pain that they are feeling and how the mind is trying to eradicate that coming into ownership by telling you something else. Now, again, part of this is the necessary need of context. But part of that, depending upon how we hear that and how we help them assimilate in mind, body. Remember, as the mind goes, the body follows. A lot of this is based on epigenetics and or the scripture. It says Jesus, when he says, as a man believes in his heart, so is he. The dynamics of what we believe matter. So in that, if we get caught in the rabbit trail of talking about all these dynamics that are outside of us, again, we don't know. We don't know because is the other participating member there presently? If the answer is no, then how can we help them? Now, again, you may want to take that perspective. And if you do, okay. I don't. I want to take the perspective of the individual sitting across from me saying, hey, how can I help them? And knowing the most middle-aged adults say that family relationships are the most important factors, then the dynamic of what is one of the biggest opportunities for them to experience pain is going to be ushered in through the marriage and or family. Why is that? Is that based upon expectations that they have that are being unmet? Okay, well, their expectations, are they realistic? Well, Brady, based on what? Again, based upon that dynamic of them acknowledging what do they want? Is it okay what they want? And then the third part of that is, will they be able to get what it is that they want? See, and I think I've communicated this before. The biggest pushback I've had in 17 years of practicing in and out of the church is, what do you want? That very question. There's a lot of other thoughts that I would have had. No, Brady, it wouldn't be that, it'd be this, or maybe this. No, this is the biggest pushback that I get in counseling. What do you want? And the reasoning for that, and I may have already communicated this, the dynamic of what we want gets repressed because we don't think we can have it. Still matters for them to acknowledge and own what they want. And I constantly will allow a person to circle back around till they actually get to this place. What do you want? Because if they can't acknowledge and own, then repression's taking place. If repression's taking place, then pain is present. If pain's present, then as a result of that, there's a message that more than likely, almost 100%, if I can say that, is going to be in contradiction to the message of the gospel. And as a result of that, now there's confusion because you got the message of the gospel for believers coming, trying to assimilate its way in, but yet this message of pain assimilating in. Now, as a result of that, what happens? What gets elevated? How do they respond as a result? Researchers have found that marital satisfaction increases in middle age as issues of money, child rearing, and division of labor either subside or are worked out. Think about that. Oh goodness, Dr. Townsend talks about the research of that the longer someone stays together, the greater the opportunity of satisfaction can take place. I was curious if that was his research, but it wasn't. Okay, so in that, the dynamic is having people, whether they're actually working in it or not, just actually being together. Research actually says that, guess what? Marital satisfaction can actually continue. But the dynamic of pain being representational in that very moment creates what? And again, in pain, people want out. And if they think that the marriage is actually the caveat of pain, then as a result of that, they look at the marriage and say, boy, I'll be happier when I'm not with him. I'll be happier when I'm not with her, or whomever it may be, right? So the dynamic of marital counseling, how do we help them understand pain, to acknowledge and own, and to emote and start getting it out so that therefore it doesn't give them this perspective that the other person is the problem. Now, again, the other person may be part of the problem, but are they the problem themselves? Now, again, if there's dynamics of abuse and those type of things, well, again, there's different contexts for that. But just this dynamic. One study shows that 17 couples married 50 years or more showed that factors contributing to success and longevity were much the same as those of their younger counterparts. Think about that. It's pretty fascinating. Huh. And sometimes I read the research and I kind of get lost in it, because I think it's really fascinating, because a lot of times what you'll experience may not reflect, kind of like I talked about, may not reflect what you experience. Now, again, is that universal. Now, one of the downplays of Freud was that his research that he utilized were all based upon his subjects, were all based upon the clientele that he saw. And as a result of that, a lot of researchers will look at Freud and say, well, discredit him, because they feel like that it was very, from a very specific population. It was from a very small sample size, if you will. One of the dynamics of marriage, if you look at the graph on 349, it says you see the dynamic of marriages from the 60s of people getting married all the way to getting close to 2020. Versus the dynamic of divorces from 1960 to 2010. And as a result of that, in the 80s and 90s being at the greatest. Now, again, this research didn't go all the way to the 2020, but the dynamic of why are people getting divorced? Well, Brady, there's some dynamics if there's abuse, of course. But if we were created to do life within relationship, then what do those relationships look like when it's not working? And again, Brady, I don't plan on seeing people have married, okay? But will you see people in a relationship? And the answer is yes, because I don't know anybody that's not in a relationship with somebody. Their child, somebody at church, whatever it may be, right? And how do we help them? How do we help them from the research so that therefore that marital disillusion and distress remain a critical issue according to the book? Dissolution and distress. Well, I think part of it is us playing a role in making sure the very context that we're given is accurate. Well, Brady, they don't make me happy. Make you happy? Are they supposed to? Well, what do you mean, Brady? Yeah, my happiness is based upon them. Wow. That means a lot of power that you've had has been transformed over to them. Well, Brady, we're one. Of course we are. But the dynamic of that is what? If we don't learn to validate ourselves and allow the very pain that we're experiencing to be addressed internally before externally, then as a result of that, in 17 years of working with people, it's going to be devastating. It's going to be devastating. I have not heard in one time in 17 years where somebody says, Brady, I addressed the external first. I did the exact opposite of what we talked about before I addressed the internal, and guess what? It went beautifully. Again, we lean into things that are loving. And how much of the time are you going to be interacting with marriages that the husband addresses the wife or the wife addresses the husband, and they're mad because of whatever complexity, and as a result of that, they address each other first. The other person feels the hostility coming from them, and as a result of that, their defense mechanisms come up and they're ready to fight, not physically, but the dynamic of protecting themselves. Why? Because we are in need of protection. We are in need of defense. How is the bigger question? Not if, but how. And helping people understand the dynamic of acknowledging and owning what it is they're feeling first before they go address their spouse. Because again, if they can acknowledge and own it and allow this beauty for ashes transaction, then as a result of that, now we've emoted to God, and God's present into what it is we're experiencing now. As I go to my spouse to have this conversation, or I go to my son or my daughter, whomever it may be, to have this conversation, now pain isn't the primary motivator. Pain isn't the primary motivator, but love is. So therefore, if I'm coming to my spouse, if I'm coming to whomever it may be, and I've had this opportunity of beauty for ashes because of the opportunity of addressing this thing, this pain internally. Now, as a result of that, they're going to lean in a little bit, even if it's a hard conversation. We have hard conversations in counseling all the time, if they're willing. And I think one of the great things, and again, what I'll do now, again, what I do isn't always, perfect, right? No, but the dynamic of laying a foundation of helping them understand pain and how to process the pain and how to acknowledge and own it before they ever address the other individual. I've seen some of the I've seen some really hard marriage within counseling. Some that actually, when they would come in the room and they'd sit on opposite sides of the couch, I have a coffee table. I would actually roll as close to the coffee table as I possibly could. Well, why'd you do that, Brady? Because I didn't know if I was going to have to leap in front of them to keep them from actually putting their hands on each other. Well, Brady, that seems like that's an overreach. I could say that how you could take that, but I promise you that really did take place. I had some great sessions. I'd like to tell you that couple, it was successful. It wasn't. But the dynamic of the outcome is making sure it is not for us, because there's three wills involved. There's God's, which has, is, and will always do his part. Fantastic. There's typically the other person who's not a part of therapy, or maybe they are. But can the person that's sitting across from me, can they do anything about theirs? And the answer is no. They can influence, but they can't do anything really about it, of making them. And then there's a person sitting across from you and really helping that individual to grow, to get to a place of happiness being internally, because it's based upon this connection this way. There's a reason why Jesus was asleep on the boat. There was a storm that he was going through, and as a result of that, the internal peace that he felt allowed him to be perfectly secure to the point that he could fall asleep. Well, Brady, that's difficult. The idea of getting to this place of peace when there is storms and trepidation all going all around us. Oh, of course, absolutely. But is it impossible, or is it possible? So as we work with adults, and again, I'm going to let you read everything that this author has to say. What's the application? Again, as a result of that, that's what I like to come in and allow these lectures to be, teachings, whatever you want to call them, is the idea of how do I take what's in this book and how do I apply it in a way that's going to be beneficial to me as I prepare to sitting across from individuals and help them. Help them understand and have a proper context to pain. Help them understand what the message is of pain that they've been receiving. And as a result of that, how has that fed a belief that is impacting the way that they see themselves? How that message of pain and that belief, how it contradicts the message of God if they're people of belief. And the idea of allowing them a safe place to come in and emote and get this out. What are some other safe ways for them to be able to do that? So because the greatest work is not going to be actually in your counseling room. They're only going to be meeting with you for an hour. Maybe once a week. Typically in a lot of the counseling parameters, it's usually once every 2 weeks. So you think about the dynamic of homework assignments and things of that nature, which is very traditional CBT, with the cognitive behavioral theory. But the dynamic of that is, how do you help challenge them with sensitivity? If we can help them understand a proper context of pain. Well, Brady, how many marriages are you working with right now? I would say 65 to maybe 70% of my caseload right now is marriages. Family dynamics would be a part of that. And in this, if I can get them to the place of acknowledging and owning pain as it comes in, acknowledging and owning the pain that's already in them, inviting God into that. Well, Brady, what do you do with that when people aren't believers? It can be difficult. At least acknowledging and owning and then emoting. For people of belief, we invite God in. Well, Brady, I want God to be representational in that. Absolutely. So the dynamic of acknowledge and own, and then inviting love in. Acknowledging, owning, inviting peace in. Inviting who God is, maybe in the context of without the name of Jesus. Now, Brady, the name of Jesus is important. Of course it is. But the dynamic of the attributes of who Jesus is. I don't even know the attributes is the right word, because again, peace isn't just a part of him, he is peace. So when we ask for true peace to be in, then chew on that. Could that be a way? Because really, if pain is what they're hoping to get away from, then peace is what they're hoping to achieve. That's why majority of the religions out there people are sitting around trying to get to the place of self-peace. So, marriages. With this population, there's all kinds of complexities. The big five personality. Do people change from a behavioral or from a personality standpoint? They can. Talking about this dad and this son and how they were communicating night and day. And in that, because of a situation that happened, caused the son tremendous pain. And the dad starts laughing. And it makes the son mad. And the reason why he's laughing is not to make the son mad. He's laughing because of how he's communicating, and him coming into awareness that, wow, I hadn't really thought about him thinking I hadn't thought about the idea of how my lack of communication can bring people pain. He's coming into awareness, but in that, he's laughing. And it's causing his son pain. So would we walk them through basically what I'm talking to you about right now? We can add it. We can express it within families. The dynamics of acknowledging and owning internally before externally, and the idea of not having to agree, but to validate, to acknowledge. I see you. I hear you. I understand. Now, again, agreement's great, but if we're only chasing an agreement, then as a result of that, we could be ushering in pain to them because of the unrealistic nature of getting them to agreement. They may not agree, but can they validate one another? And if they can validate one another, then as a result of that, that helps them move from here to here so that conversation can happen logically, rationally. So the opportunity is, I can see that point. Don't have to agree with it, but I see it. I can respect it. Okay, and the other person can say the same thing. Now with that, what are we doing? Within communication comes the opportunity of context, comes the opportunity of outlook, comes in to all these different potentials that as a result of that, unity can be had. Can marriage be successful? Well, Brady, what does successful mean? Happy, exciting, all those different complexities. I believe it can. How do we help this population? There's all these different other complexities that we haven't talked about. Finances, jobs, children, the economy, whatever it may be. Trauma, and how all those different things can be brought into the marriage, and as a result of that can impact the marriage. How do we help them? We help them address what's in them and what's coming in them first, so that they can emote and start getting that energy, if I can call it that word, out. So that they can eventually move to having this conversation with whomever they need to, so that therefore they can actually move forward. Hope you like the reading. Week 6. We are almost there. Week 7, here we come. But before that, we have this week. Hope you have a great day. Hope you enjoy the Super Bowl. Whatever team you're rooting for, hope they win. Just hope everybody is safe and you have a great Great evening watching the game. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you, be gracious to you. May the Lord lift his countenance on you and give you peace in everything that you do in week 6. Week 6, here we go. Have a great day. Have a great week. Bye-bye.